How did you learn Spanish? My answer varies. Usually I just say, I studied it in college, which is true, but the full truth makes me uncomfortable. I was raised in an evangelical church in rural northern New York along the Canadian border. I was also homeschooled, so church was my only community. Faith was everything, and it directed every aspect of our lives. I went on several missions trips in high school to the Caribbean and started learning Spanish. You don't really want to save anyone, one of my friends said when I went back to the Dominican Republic at 16. You just want to be in the DR. It was true, but I became motivated to become fluent in Spanish, and that began pushing me through my already unconventional high school experience. I decided to go to language school in Mexico. So I went to San Miguel de Allende in the state of Guanajuato on a church-sanctioned trip for 3 months at the age of 17. During my last month, I was the only student in level 4, and Javier was my teacher. He was an older, elegant man and had a quiet way about him. We spent the mornings going over grammar, and then in the afternoons we would pull our chairs out to a corner of the school's courtyard and have conversation class. We talked about the tortas the region was famous for. We talked about his family, and he told me about Mexico. He told me that my experience in San Miguel was like being on an island. I remember one afternoon in particular when he described the visa process in great detail and how hard it was for the average person to go to the US, even for a visit. And I remember feeling a sense of shame that that was not the case for me. I went to a Christian college the following fall. On spring break, I returned to Mexico on a service learning trip with my school. I'm not sure exactly why, but I wanted to see a different part of Mexico. Maybe I was thinking of Javier. We went to Tijuana and stayed in a little church. It was on this trip that I saw the Mexican-American border for the first time, from the Mexican side. I remember being surprised that the beach was so full, that there were no barriers before getting right to the fence. You could buy tacos and ice cream. And then the fence, with its hundreds of white crosses, each one there to memorialize the death of someone who had died attempting to cross. One of the first crosses I saw had the name José Luis Vázquez Gutierrez and his age, 20 años, and the place he was from, Guanajuato. He was 1 year older than me. It didn't seem right that I had spent 3 months in his state and left and come back, and he had died trying to get into my country. It's been over a decade since I went to Mexico, but the border has remained a symbol, a political tool, a very real barrier, and a memorial. I have often wondered what would be different if our side had the same memorial, the same long row of crosses. And I have questioned why I was there to begin with. Why was I at the border as a 19-year-old? On one hand, if there's something I think all Americans should see, it is the border from the Mexican side. On the other, why did we spend thousands of dollars to observe this with no additional context? Was it right to be there at all? We partnered with the church, but we never brought the Mexican youth group to our school. Our efforts were focused on our own experience. We were not all white, but there was a thread of white supremacy, a certain savior complex tinged with imperialism present. One that I find hard to stomach from my still often hypocritical, but hopefully more self-aware vantage point as an adult. As I went back into old digital files and began to create the images, the cyanotypes that accompany this essay, I kept sending one of my friends from the youth group in Tijuana pictures on WhatsApp. I still see Jorge as a teenager in my head, but we're both adults now. He has his own family and is still in Tijuana. I ask him if we can talk about the trips. Jorge says they loved it when we came. I ask him if he ever resented us, for our presence, our ignorance. He says no, but I can't picture him resenting anyone. There was something very innocent about our time together, but there was something sinister too. I feel grateful I experienced what I did, but I feel shame at the ignorance in it all, the audacity that we could help by our presence, the pretense of service on our part. We learned about contrast but not responsibility. We learned what pain looks like when it is visible, memorialized again and again and again. But we did not learn about the cause of any pain. We did not talk about why people migrate. We didn't learn about the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, and how 2 million Mexican farmers lost their livelihoods as a result of it. We certainly didn't learn about the CIA and the American desire for cheap bananas. A desire so strong it was enough for us to plant a coup in Guatemala right as they were about to secure their first democratic government. We didn't learn about the ways we have used the border to consistently and constantly dehumanize people crossing from the border's inception to today. It would be one thing to say, well, that's the evangelical church, a specifically Christian thing. But the border itself indicates that it's not. It reaches past religion and past the binary of American politics. Are we really free if our freedom is funded by costs truly impossible to measure? How many lives have to be lost, countries turned over, people pushed to move through continents and over arbitrary lines? Will we always define freedom by constraint of the other? ¿Cómo aprendiste español? How did you learn Spanish? My answer varies. It contains so many questions.